Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
And glad to have with us on our live line Assemblyman Phil Palmesano, calling in from, is it Corning or Albany today, Assemblyman Palmesano? And thanks for joining us.
No problem. I'm in Corning today, Brian.
Well, thank you for joining us, Assemblyman Palmesano. Governor Andrew Cuomo had on his Twitter page that he's all excited about the having signed the farm labor bill. I'm not sure you're quite on the same page, though.
Absolutely not, Brian. I mean, he could be all happy and giddy about it, but the fact of the matter is, with his stroke of the pen, he basically put a nail in the family farm in New York State. And the thing that I quite frankly find most offensive to his signing, he didn't go to an upstate farm or on a Long Island farm or in the Hudson Valley. You know where he signed this bill? He signed this bill in downtown New York City, surrounded by the sponsors of the bill from New York City. And I kind of find that offensive. This bill...
and not to stop you there, but to stop you there, he signed it at a media outlet. Was it a radio station or a newspaper somewhere?
I can't remember exactly where it was. I just know it was in New York City. And to talk about it and to be proud about it, and he needs to understand what he's doing. This action is going to be one of the death knells to our family farms in New York State. And he could talk about being supportive of agriculture and farming. Well, this bill certainly does not represent that. He could have stood up, but he's been advocating for this bill, which is kind of, I just find really not a good thing, Brian. 98% of the farms in New York State are family-owned farms. And I'll go through some of these statistics. I know we've talked about it before. The fact of the matter is, a few years ago, Farm Credit East did a study, and when they measured farm labor costs as a percentage of net farm income, when they looked at that study across the country, those farm labor costs were 36%. But in New York State, farm labor costs as a percentage of net farm income was 63%. So right there, those statistics need to tell you and the listeners that our farmers in New York State were already at a competitive disadvantage. And again, 98% of the farms in New York State are family-owned farms. And we've already lost 20% of our dairy farms over the past 5 years. This legislation, the original legislation, granted there was some compromise made to lessen the burden. The original bill said it was going to increase farm labor costs by $300 million annually, or 20%, and increase decrease net farm income by 23%. This at the same time, Brian, according to studies, saying farm income for our farmers has decreased by over 50% over the last few years. I mean, this is just not good for our agricultural industry.
Assemblyman, I wanted to stop you there and ask you a question. Okay, let's say I owned a family farm. I don't, but let's say I did, and I thought this rule was dumb. I maybe would try to ignore it. How are state labor department officials going to stop by farms and see who's working when? How would something like this be enforced? And I'm talking about overtime. You know, if I owned a family farm and this new rule came in and I had to work overtime, and a lot of these farmers, these small family farms, it's not a lot of people to work. It's you, your siblings, maybe a friend or two. Who's going to find out? How are they going to check to see if overtime rules are being kept? Was there any thought put into that?
Well, I think there's going to be some more regulation. Just like any piece of new legislation that comes into place, there are regulations that follow that being implemented. I'm sure there are going to be reporting requirements. There are going to be audits of that paperwork that are submitted, I'm sure. And that gets to another problem with this legislation, the way it was written. It really kind of leaves up the question what it defines a family member. I mean, basically the way the bill is written was just talking about immediate family members. So say you have a brother and sister that run a farm, and they're trying to pass on to the next generation. You know, you being the child of one, and then your cousin being the child of another, and that's not really defined as a family member necessarily in this legislation. So those things need to be looked at when they're developing these regulations. But as written, it's very problematic. So there's many problems to this bill in addition to the financial aspect of it and what it's going to have on our farmers. Using a wage board, another wage board, that's basically a three-person board one person is appointed by the AFL-CIO, and you know where they're going to head with this. They're automatically going to vote to make changes. The other one is the Department of Labor Commissioner, who gets an appointment, and then the Farm Bureau gets an appointment. Why isn't the Commissioner of Ag and Markets involved in the appointment? Given we're talking about the number one industry in our state, that was one of the concerns. And what this wage board is going to do, Brian, granted the bill that passed talked about 60 hours being the overtime threshold. Well, now there's going to be hearings, and then there's going to be a report made back by December 2020 and a recommendation. And that recommendation goes through, they could drop it down to 40 hours at that point in time. And this is not enough time. That's another concern with this legislation. By December 2020 is not enough time to really get a full grasp of the impact this law is going to be having on our family-owned farms, the negative impacts, how they're adjusting to it, to really get a full reporting of that through all the seasons. I mean, there's a lot of problems with this bill because this bill does not take effect until January. So, I mean, now you're going to have a small turnaround period of time to really get a full analysis of the impact this is having. This is a short-sightedness of my liberal, progressive, whatever you want to call them, colleagues, and this governor. And the fact of the matter is, I tell them over and over again, listen, we had colleagues, before I say what I was going to say, I had a colleague on the floor of the assembly said, you know what, I'll pay more for a gallon of milk. I don't care. And I said, that's really great that you're willing to do that, but our farmers have no control over the price of their products. They're determined by, like the milk is determined by the price of cheese out in Wisconsin, out in the Midwest. I mean, they have no say in the price they get for a gallon of milk. The net hundredweight for a price for a gallon of milk has been pretty stagnant over the past 30 years. Not a huge thing. They have up and down swings, but nothing significant. So our farmers aren't getting rich. They kind of keep trying to paint that our farmers are rich. They're not rich. They're cash poor. Yes, some of them have a lot of land, and if you look at it from a land perspective, well, they need that land to farm. But the fact of the matter is, our farmers, they take out second and third mortgages and are in debt up to their necks. You know, when you talk about feed costs and equipment costs for tractors and things of that nature, this bill is going to be devastating to our agricultural community. I don't see more farms being passed on to generation, and it's just going to be I'm very extremely concerned, if you can tell, that what this impact this legislation is going to have on our farming communities, on our family farms, on the agricultural industry as a whole. And what I will say, and I've said this over and over again, I said this in my statement when the bill passed, I said it when the governor signed this bill the other day, if there are no farms, there is no food. If there are no farms, there is no farm laborers, workers. So this bill is a really dangerous bill. This is not good for our family farmers. It's not good for our agricultural industry. And quite frankly, it's not good for anyone in New York State. It's not good for upstate New York. And the fact that these individuals are so headstrong on trying to force this bill through, the unionization of our farm labor workers, I mean, that's not a good idea. I mean, yeah, they say, well, they can't strike during certain times, but there are certain things they can do to put pressures on our farming community. And I just think it says the wrong message. It doesn't show that we have respect for our farmers and the hard work they do and what they do each and every day.
And the kind of work that they're doing, I'm thinking of, having seen and done a little farm work in high school, and because of location where I live and whatnot, and I'm thinking of baling hay, and look at your watch. Let's start to fill out some forms here for overtime. I mean, it doesn't strike me as being a very practical addition to the farm world.
It's not, Brian, and it's really what it is. It's going to be another onerous, burdensome, and costly mandate placed on our family farmers. Because, again, many of my colleagues think they're these big corporate farms. They're not. 98% of the farms in New York State are family-owned farms. They're not corporate operations. If you want to look at our dairy farms, if you want to look at our potato farms, even our vineyards, where I know we have a booming wine industry and craft beverage industry with our wineries and our breweries, but those farms aren't overrun by corporate operations or family farms in and of themselves. And these are going to be more costly mandates that are placed upon them. And it's really going to, I'm very concerned about seen more of a loss of our family farms. Like our
When you say loss of family farms, if that was me and I was in that situation, I would just say, hey, forget it, I'm shutting down. Not to encourage that kind of thing, but, that's what I'd say.
Well, that's what you're going to see happen, Brian. I think some people are going to put their hands up in the air and say, I've had enough. Just like you're seeing with a lot of people in this state. They're saying, I had enough with this burdensome tax and regulation. And on contrary to Governor Cuomo's opinion, is people aren't leaving the state because of the weather climate. They're leaving the state because of the business climate, the job climate, the economic climate, the freedom climate. And that's why they're leaving the state, Governor Cuomo. They're not leaving because of the weather. And like he seems to say out there, but it's just policies. And even the people he says that are going to be paying more, you see with the push, you see more wealthy people, the people who can often move, are leaving the state. I read a report yesterday where you see more of the high-income earners being enticed to Florida, where there's no state income tax, where there's lower costs, where they can save $20,000 to $120,000 per family in taxes and fees and regulations. They're going to be leaving New York State, leaving New York City because of the burdensome tax regulations. People who live in the city, I mean, it's really burdensome taxes they have there. That's our tax base. If we lose more of those people, we're going to have a hole in our revenues coming into the state, so we're not going to have the money to pay for these expensive programs that all my colleagues, my progressive liberal colleagues, want to keep pushing. If there's no money to do that, if the revenue is gone, it's going to be a bigger problem.
Talking to Assemblyman Phil Palmesano, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the Climate Action Council bill.
Selecting a nursing home for a loved one isn't easy until you've discovered Hornell Gardens Nursing and Rehabilitation. Hornell Gardens delivers the highest level of care, compassion, and commitment with amenities and activities that will enrich body, mind, and spirit. It's a place that's close to home. Stop in for a tour of Hornell Gardens, located at 434 Monroe Avenue in Hornell, or to learn more, call 585-222-CARE or visit hurlbutcare.com.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carroll, who says the heat wave's over.
It is. We broke it, Brian. We've got a cold front now off to our south, stalled out over Pennsylvania. Low pressure moving along it, producing some rain over the southern tier, the Finger Lakes, and back into western New York this morning. Then we find more rain across Michigan, Ohio, all the way into Missouri and Texas. And we're going to see little ripples of low pressure move along that frontal boundary, and that means the showers are going to continue across our area, not only today, but into tonight and maybe tomorrow morning. Good news is, though, there's some great weather up across the Dakotas and Minnesota this morning. And Brian, our weather is going to drop in with that system through the second half of the work week. So once we get into late tomorrow night, the weather starts to improve and looks very nice between Wednesday and Friday. Today, though, showers. Watch for a thunderstorm. There could be a few locally heavy downpours. Temperatures today, 70 to 75. Sunrise earlier this morning was at 5:54. The sun will set tonight at 8:40. Showers for tonight. Lows will fall back to 55 to 60. Tomorrow, we turn partly sunny, but there is the chance for leftover showers, especially tomorrow morning. It'll be very comfortable, highs around 75. Tomorrow night, partly cloudy and cool, 50 to 55. Abundant sunshine, pleasant on Wednesday, 75. Sunshine just a little bit warmer for Thursday, Brian.
Thank you, Rob. Back with Assemblyman Phil Palmesano, the Climate Action Council bill. Tell us about that, Assemblyman.
Yes, Brian, this is what I refer to as, as you've seen at the federal level with AOC, candidate pushing for the Green New Deal at the federal level. This is like New York State's version of the Green New Deal, and I've been very, very critical of it. Let me just say from the get-go, just because I've been critical of this bill and I don't support this bill doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing anything to improve our climate and to make changes. My concern with this whole issue is that it needs to be balanced, and we certainly can't do it alone. So what this legislation is going to do is basically say, in New York and in New York alone, we're going to get to 85% carbon-free by 2050, and at 70% by 2030, 7% of our generations are going to come from all renewables. Right now, we're at about 25 to 29% renewable generation. And probably the one that I find the most concerning and probably unrealistic is to be 100% carbon-free for our electric generation capacity for our power plants by 2040. So that means you can't have any more natural gas power plants. You can't have these types of power-producing plants. Even the oil type of burning that you have, especially in New York City predominantly, would have to be totally gone. But the problem is with that, Brian, this is not a feasible thing. And when I talk about energy policy, Brian, I always talk about it from a three-legged stool perspective. Our energy needs to be, yes, clean has to be a part of it, no question about it. But it also has to be reliable and affordable. And this bill that passed deals with the clean, but it doesn't deal with the reliable and affordable. When you talk about reliability, you need to make sure that you have enough power and generation to keep the lights on. Look what's going on in New York City this past week.
I was just about to bring that up. Headline this morning with over 40,000 in a blackout. Governor Cuomo is ripping Con Edison.
Yeah, of course, he's always going to blame the utility, but the point of this is you need to look at the overall policy of what's going on. What do you think is going to happen down the road when we're all basically saying we're going to be all green energy, all solar farms, wind? The problem with solar and wind is it's intermittent. It is about 30% reliable. So even right now, you still need backup capacity from our conventional, our natural gas, our oil, our nuclear. That has to be part of the equation. And that's why I talk about a fuel diversity. Think about it, your 401k. Do you put all your money in cash or bonds or stocks? No. You diversify your portfolio to make sure it's strong, to make sure it's balanced, and to make sure you protect your assets. And unfortunately, going to just green, all renewables, wind, solar, hydro, which is a big part of our equation, is not going to work. I don't understand how that's going to work, and it's not going to work, quite frankly. And then you see things going on, and what you will have, Brian, if we go to all that in New York State, you're going to have what they have is carbon leakage. Because New York, and this is the part of it why I stress about going alone, the concern I have, if you take New York State's total carbon emissions, we represent 3.3% of the total carbon emissions for the entire country, but 0.5% of the carbon emissions for the entire world. And this bill doesn't affect China, Russia, Brazil, India. It does nothing to make them to put in place policies. This isn't going to do. You're not going to have a major impact there. It doesn't affect Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and our border states. So what you're going to have if this puts in place is what they're going to have, carbon leakage. So now you're going to have our manufacturers, our high energy intensive users, our manufacturing plants, things that they like. Think about Alstom, how much power they have generation coming in. They need reliable power to do what they're doing. If you don't have a reliable source of power coming in, our manufacturers, our farms, same thing. What about our transportation industry? I think over half of the carbon emissions are from our transportation industry. Are we going to have all electric cars? Now, don't even talk about the cost aspects of this. There is a scientist from the University of Massachusetts. I brought this up on the floor. He supports the climate action plan, but even his own estimate said it's going to cost $8.9 billion annually to comply with the new mandates and the new regulations. Think about our businesses that they would need to be retrofitted so they can go to 100% clean.
Yeah, and I have a question there. The wind projects, there would have to be an increase in wind projects if with this Climate Action Council. Would they be deciding where it all goes, and where would it go? Some people argue that it's most effective off the coast of Long Island. Would we see a lot more offshore wind, or would it be heading upstate, or both? Would it be would there be more wind projects in our upstate towns, or would it be a lot more in Long Island, or, as I said, both?
I think it's going to be everything. I mean, I know the governor this week, when he signed the climate bill, talked about offshore wind, but even that is not enough capacity to make up the generation that we really need. So you're going to have to see an abundance of wind farms all over the state. I can't remember how much they were talking about. They would need. You need thousands upon wind farms and solar farms. And right now, as you travel around the upstate New York, you see solar farms here and there and wind farms. You're going to need more of it if it's all going to be 70% renewable by 2030 and 100% carbon-free generation by 2040 with our power plants. It's just unrealistic. It's going to be costly and burdensome. And what you're not going to have, Brian, is you're not going to get the results you want, because when those businesses leave, when our our auto dealers leave to go to other states, when our farmers leave to go to other states, when all our manufacturers leave to go to other states. So now you might be making a lowering your threshold in New York, but the overall net impact is going to be more carbon emissions because those neighboring states don't have the same strict regulations that we have. So now you're going to have more carbon emissions going into the atmosphere. So you're going to have what they call carbon leakage. So the overall net effect is not going to be positive. It's not going to help the environment. To continue on, I mean, we have the other problem that kind of burdens us even more is the governor has continued to stop pipeline projects from being developed. There's been 3 major ones so far, one out in the Buffalo area, the Constitution Pipeline, and now this one down in that goes through New York City. But it was going to be made to put power into New York City and Long Island and the like for 3 major for projects like Belmont Park. There's an article today saying the Islanders, they were going to build a new stadium. Well, National Grid is not going to accept any more customers if this pipeline project does not go through. So what kind of power are they going to have for the stadium they're going to build? I mean, all these new developments, you're not going to have the power capacity and the generation capacity and the electric capacity. You can't do it without it. And it's just, this is the types of policies we continue to see from this administration. It's like a war on natural gas. We're not fracking in New York, but now to say that even the natural gas that's coming in from other areas, other states, the development can't come in here to help provide the energy we need for a small business or a manufacturing plant to operate for a development so individuals can heat their homes and power their homes. Well, even in New York City, Brian, I've been down and talked to my colleagues there before. They were converting oil boilers over to natural gas, and that's going to stop. And National Grid has been doing thousands of those every year and making progress on that to get rid of this dirty fuel. So now they're going to have to rely more on this dirty fuel burning, this oil burning, which is not as good for the environment as natural gas. And the fact of the matter is the incorporation of natural gas into our system has actually helped reduce our carbon emissions that are going on in this country. It's proven. The New York Independent System Operators has demonstrated that. The New York Independent System Operators is a neutral body that kind of manages the grid to make sure we're having reliable sources of power getting to where it needs so the electricity can stay on and the lights can stay on, and they manage that. And natural gas has helped lower our carbon emissions. And these policies, this Climate Action Council, which is now going to have people appointed to the board to weigh in and make decisions as we move forward with this. But I'm concerned where this decision is heading, what it's going to mean. I think overall it's going to be devastating to our economy as we move forward. Again, our high-intensity manufacturers, our energy users, our farms. We already had the farm labor bill. Now what are you going to have to? We tell our farmers they're going to have an electric tractor on their grounds. I mean,
with that, we do have to leave it, Assemblyman Palmesano, though I do believe you wanted to get out a shout-out.
Oh, yes, if I could. Thank you, Brian. I just want to say to my cousin Mike and Susie Palmesano, it was great to see them. Their family had a surprise. Their kids had a surprise. Grandkids had a surprise birthday party for them. Their 75th birthday. It was great to see them yesterday. So if you see Mike and Susie around town, make sure you say happy 75th birthday to them. They're great people, great family. It was just great to see some of our family members yesterday to help celebrate with them. So happy birthday, Mike and Susie.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much. Congratulations, Mike and Susie, and thank you for joining us, Assemblyman Phil Palmesano.
Thank you, Brian.